there is a sound I have never forgotten. It is small. Unremarkable, really. The kind of sound that, in any other context, you would not notice at all. The hollow plastic rattle of a pill bottle. And then the dull, definitive sound of that bottle hitting the bottom of a trash can. I was 16 years old. I was leaning against the door frame of the kitchen, pale and shaking, the way I always was when my medication levels dropped. The room had that particular tilt that comes with certain kinds of illness, not spinning exactly. More like the world is slightly unmoored. Like the floor is making a decision it hasn't announced yet. My mother was standing at the counter. She was not looking at me. She was holding up a dress, sequined, shimmering, the kind of thing that catches every available light and throws it back at you in a way that says, "Look here, not there." My sister was turning slowly in front of the kitchen window, watching her own reflection in the glass. And my medication was in the trash. My mother turned to me finally with the expression she used when she considered a conversation already finished. "Don't be selfish, Chloe," she said. "You're always sick anyway. Your sister has a real chance to be someone. Beauty is the priority right now. Your pills can wait until next month. You'll figure it out." She turned back to the dress. And I stood there in the doorframe, shaking, understanding for the first time with complete clarity something I had been circling for years. To her, I was not a daughter. I was an inconvenience in the shape of one. And inconveniences do not have priorities, they have workarounds. That night, I made a phone call. I packed a bag. And I left. 15 years later, she walked into my research facility. She did not know whose name was on the door. This is that story. And if you have ever had to save your own life because the people who were supposed to protect you were too busy looking at their own reflection, this is also yours. Stay with me. Every single part of this matters. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. If you are a survivor, if you have ever fought a battle that no one around you even acknowledged was happening, hit that like button. Let's see how many of us are in this room today. Subscribe and hit the bell. Because we are just getting started. Let me show you where I am standing today. The facility is on the 4th floor of a research building in the medical district. The floors are polished concrete. The air has the faint, neutral scent of filtered ventilation and controlled temperature, the scent of a place where conditions are managed precisely because precision is the difference between a result and a variable. There are 2 laboratories, a trial coordination office, and a consultation room with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the city. On the wall of the main corridor, there is a portrait. A professional photograph, framed simply. Beneath it, a small plaque with a name and a title. The name is mine. The title reads, Founder and Lead Researcher. I am 31 years old. I have a condition that, at 16, my mother decided was less important than sequins. I have managed that condition for 15 years through a combination of the medication I was eventually able to afford on my own, the clinical knowledge I spent a decade acquiring, and a stubbornness that I can only describe as biological. I do not look sick today. I want to say that plainly, because I think it matters. I look like someone who has been through something and is still standing. I look like someone who chose, every single day, to keep going when the easier thing would have been to stop. I look like the person my mother told me I would never be. On my desk this morning is a clinical trial list. The trial is for a genetic treatment protocol that I have spent 7 years developing. It addresses the specific condition I have. The condition that is, as it turns out, hereditary. At the top of the rejected applicants pile is a name I recognize. She has the same condition I do. She needs the treatment I spent my life building. And she does not yet know that the daughter she threw away is the only person in the world who holds the key to her survival. But before I tell you what happened when she walked through that door, I need to take you back. To a kitchen that smelled like hairspray and something burning in the oven. To a sequined dress catching the light. To the sound of a plastic bottle hitting the bottom of a trash can. To the night I stopped waiting to be saved and started saving myself. To understand the medication, you need to understand the condition. And to understand the condition, you need to understand that I had been managing it since I was 11 years old. It is a genetic disorder. Chronic, progressive if untreated, manageable with the right protocol. The medication was not optional in the way that vitamins are optional or a follow-up appointment is optional. It was the difference between my body functioning and my body failing. Without it, the symptoms escalated within days. The shaking first. Then the fatigue so deep it felt structural, like the bones themselves were tired. Then, if it went long enough, the cardiac involvement. My doctors had been clear. My prescription was clear. The refill schedule was clear. What was not clear to me at 16 was how much none of that clarity mattered to my mother when it competed with something she wanted more. The pageant circuit had been her project for years. My sister Vanessa was 3 years younger than me, 13 that year, with the kind of conventional prettiness that photographs well and a deep, genuine desire to please our mother, which is the most valuable currency in a household organized around performance. My mother had been working the pageant calendar since Vanessa was 9. The entry fees, the coaches, the hair appointments, the spray tans, the costumes. It was expensive. It was always expensive. And there was always a reason why the expense was worth it and why everything else could wait. That month, the dress had been the crisis. The original gown had been damaged. I never fully understood how, and I suspect the truth was more complicated than the version I was told. A replacement had been found. It cost more than the original. The difference needed to come from somewhere. It came from my prescription refill. I found out when I went to take my evening dose and the cabinet was empty. I stood there for a moment, very still, the way you stand when something has happened and your mind is still deciding whether to believe it. I went downstairs. The dress was on the counter, still in its garment bag, half unzipped to show the sequins. My mother was touching them with the focused admiration of someone handling something precious. Vanessa was nearby, already half in the skirt, already glowing with the particular excitement of a child who believes she is about to become more visible. I asked about the medication. My mother did not stop touching the sequins. "Don't be selfish, Chloe," she said. "You're always sick anyway. Your sister has a real chance to be someone. Beauty is the priority right now. Your pills can wait until next month. You'll figure it out." She said, "You're always sick anyway," like it was a character flaw. Like the condition was something I was doing to the family rather than something happening to my body. Like the inconvenience of my survival was, at its root, a failure of attitude. She said, "Your sister has a real chance to be someone," in a room where I was standing. She said beauty is the priority, and did not appear to hear what she was actually saying, which was, "Your life is not." I did not argue. I had learned by then that argument was a form of hope, and hope required believing that the other person was capable of being reached. I was no longer sure she was. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time in the particular stillness of someone making a decision that cannot be unmade. Then I picked up my phone and called my great-aunt Ruth, who was my grandmother's sister and who had, over the years, quietly made it known that I was welcome if I ever needed a place to land. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. I did not cry. I described it the way I would later learn to describe a clinical situation, factually, sequentially, with the relevant details in the right order. She said, "Pack what you need. I'll be there in an hour." Some people save your life with dramatic gestures. Ruth saved mine with a 1-hour drive and a spare bedroom and the understanding that sometimes the most important thing a person can offer is simply a door that opens. I packed one bag. I did not say goodbye to my mother. She was still in the kitchen with the dress when I heard Ruth's car in the driveway. I walked out. And I did not look back. Ruth lived 40 minutes from the city in a small house that smelled like coffee and old paperbacks. She was 72 years old, had buried a husband and a son, and had kept going, and she possessed the particular serenity of someone who has survived enough to stop being surprised by anything. She did not ask me to explain myself more than once. She did not offer advice I hadn't asked for. She made up the spare room, showed me where the towels were, and the next morning drove me to the pharmacy herself to start the process of getting my prescription transferred and reinstated. She paid for the first refill. I told her I would pay her back. She said, "You will, in your own way, when it's your turn to open a door for someone." I have thought about that sentence many times since. I needed a job. I was 16, in a new school district, managing a chronic condition without parental support, and I needed income that could cover my medical costs as the primary line item, with everything else arranged around that. I found a position with a medical courier service. Entry level, which at 16 meant I was the person who loaded and unloaded, who tracked the manifests, who made sure the cold chain medications were maintained at the right temperature through every leg of the delivery route. The irony was not lost on me. I was delivering the medication I had been denied. I was handling it carefully, tracking it precisely, making sure it arrived intact and on time to people who needed it, while managing my own doses on a budget that required me to know the exact cost of every pill. I learned a great deal in that job. Not just about medication logistics, though I learned that too, the cold chain protocols, the regulatory requirements, the documentation that travels with a controlled substance from the pharmacy to the patient. I learned what it looks like when a system works correctly, what the infrastructure of keeping people alive actually consists of. And I learned, viscerally, personally, in a way that no classroom could have taught me, what it costs when that system fails someone. Because it had failed me. Not the medical system, exactly. The system that was supposed to surround me, the parental system, the family system, the structure that is meant to exist so that a 16-year-old with a chronic illness does not have to calculate the cost of her own survival against the cost of a pageant dress. That system had failed. And I was, every single day, building a replacement for it out of whatever materials I could find. There is a particular kind of education that comes from surviving something you were not supposed to have to survive alone. It is not theoretical. It does not come from a textbook. It comes from the specific, cellular knowledge of what it costs to keep going, and what happens when someone decides that cost is not worth paying. I was acquiring that education every day. And somewhere in the middle of it, I decided that I was going to spend my life making sure other people did not have to acquire it the same way. I finished high school. I applied for every scholarship that existed. I got a partial one and a loan, and I kept the courier job through my first 2 years of university because the income was consistent and the schedule was manageable. I studied biology, then biochemistry. Then, in my 3rd year, I found the research laboratory that would change the direction of everything. The laboratory belonged to a researcher named Dr. Amara Osei. She was studying genetic expression in autoimmune and metabolic disorders, which, as it happened, overlapped significantly with the mechanism underlying my own condition. I introduced myself after one of her public seminars. I told her I was a biochemistry student with a personal history of the condition she was studying and that I was interested in the research. I did not lead with my grades or my ambitions. I led with the truth, because I had learned by then that the truth, stated plainly, is more persuasive than any performance of it. She hired me as a lab assistant the following semester. I want to describe what a research laboratory actually smells like, because I think it matters for this story. It smells like antiseptic and reagents and the faint metallic edge of equipment that runs continuously. It is cool, always slightly cool, because many of the samples require temperature control. The light is precise and even. Everything is labeled. Everything is measured. Nothing is approximate. It was the opposite of a sequined dress catching the kitchen light. It was the opposite of everything that had been valued in the house I grew up in. It felt, from the first day, like home. I worked in that lab through the rest of my undergraduate degree and into my doctorate. I worked while managing my own symptoms, which flared periodically and required me to know exactly what my body was doing at any given time, a kind of intimate, continuous self-monitoring that most people my age did not have to practice. I worked when I was exhausted. I worked when the symptoms made it hard to focus, and I had to read the same data set 3 times to be sure I was reading it correctly. I worked because the alternative was not working, and not working was not something I could afford in any sense of the word. Meanwhile, from a distance, I was aware of what was happening at home. I did not maintain contact with my mother. But small pieces of information reached me through Ruth, who was careful about what she shared and why. Vanessa had continued with the pageants for a few more years. The career, such as it was, had peaked early and faded the way these things often do. The window is narrow and the competition is relentless, and the judging criteria shift with the season. By the time Vanessa was 19, the circuit had moved on. She had moved back home. She was working a series of jobs that did not connect to anything she had trained for, because what she had trained for was being looked at, and the world has a limited number of positions that pay for that. My mother, Ruth told me carefully one afternoon, was not well. The condition is genetic. I had known, theoretically, that this was relevant to my family history. Knowing it theoretically and hearing that your mother has been diagnosed are two different kinds of knowing. I sat with that information for a while. I did not call her. I went back to the lab. There is a version of this story where I tell you I immediately decided to save her. And there is a version where I tell you I decided immediately not to. The truth is neither of those things. The truth is that I went back to work because the work was the point regardless of who it eventually helped. I had not built this to be a weapon. I had built it because people were suffering from something that did not have to kill them. What I did with that, when the moment came, was a decision I had not yet made. The Trial Coordination Office has a waiting area. It is small and clean, and the chairs are the particular shade of neutral that medical facilities favor because it does not agitate anyone. There is a water dispenser. There are 2 plants. There is a window. And on the corridor wall just outside the office, there is the portrait. I was in the laboratory when my assistant came to find me. Her expression was carefully professional in the way that people's expressions go when they are carrying information they are not sure how to deliver. "The 11 o'clock consultation is here," she said. "She's asking to speak with you directly. She says it's a family matter." I took off my gloves. I set down what I was working on. I washed my hands at the lab sink, the careful, systematic way you wash when you have been handling samples, each step deliberate. Then I walked to the consultation room. She was sitting in one of the neutral chairs, and she was smaller than I remembered. That is the first thing I noticed. Not smaller in height, in presence. The specific largeness she had always occupied, the certainty, the authority, the way she filled a room with the confidence of someone who believed the room was arranged for her benefit, that was diminished. The condition does that. I knew it from the inside. The fatigue is structural. It changes how a person holds themselves. She looked up when I came in, and the expression that crossed her face was one I had never seen on her before. It moved through several stages quickly: recognition, confusion, something that might have been the beginning of relief, and then something else underneath all of it. Something complicated and not yet named. "Chloe," she said. "Hello, Mom," I said. I sat down across from her. I had a folder on the table, her file, her application, the assessment results. I put my hands flat on the table. I looked at her. She had aged. Of course she had. 15 years is 15 years. But the illness had accelerated something. There were shadows under her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror on the bad days, from the days when the medication needed adjusting and my body was doing the work of compensating. She had been doing that work without medication. Or with insufficient medication. I could see it. Part of me, the part that had stood in a door frame at 16, shaking, watching her hold a dress up to the light, registered this with a specific, precise emotion that I am going to be honest with you about. It was not satisfaction. It was not revenge. It was something much more complicated and much less clean than either of those things. It was grief. Delayed, complicated, still unfinished grief for the mother I had needed her to be, and the version of my own life that would have existed if she had been that. She began to speak. She told me about the diagnosis. She told me about the progression. She talked about the trial, that she had heard about it, that she had been told it was the most promising protocol currently available, that she had applied and been placed on the review list. Then she said, "I gave you life, Chloe. Whatever happened between us, I'm your mother. That has to count for something." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said what I had prepared to say, not as a speech, I had not written anything down, but as the plain, exact truth of what I had learned and what I believed. "I learned a lot about priorities from you," I said. "My priority is saving people who value life over vanity. You taught me that beauty was the priority. You were wrong. Life is the priority. It has always been the priority. And since you always told me I would figure it out on my own, I need you to understand that I did. I figured out everything on my own, including this." I let that sit. Then I opened the folder. "I am going to tell you what I decided. And I am going to tell you why. But first, I want to say something about the nature of this kind of decision, because I think it matters. I had spent 7 years building this treatment protocol. Every choice I made in those 7 years was oriented toward one thing: reducing the number of people who suffer unnecessarily from a condition that does not have to be a death sentence. That was the mission. That was what I got up for every morning when my own symptoms were making it difficult to get up. The mission was not conditional on who the patient was. That is not a sentiment. It is a principle. And it is a principle I had built deliberately, carefully, because I knew, I had always known, from the night I stood in that doorframe, what it looks like when a person decides that someone's survival is conditional. What it costs. What it does to the person whose survival is being evaluated. I was not going to be that person. Not for anyone. Not even for her. But I was also not going to pretend that nothing had happened. I was not going to absorb the history into a clean, uncomplicated act of generosity that erased what it had cost me to get to that room. So here is what I did. I told her the truth. All of it. The full, clinical, precise account of what her decision had cost me medically, the period without medication, the symptoms that escalated, the cardiac event that happened 3 weeks after I left and that Ruth drove me to the emergency room for at 2 in the morning. The one I had never told anyone about because by the time it was over I was focused entirely on what came next and there was no room for looking back. I told her what the years had looked like. Not as an accusation, as a record. The way you document a case history. Factually, sequentially, with the relevant details in the right order. She listened. She did not interrupt. I watched her face move through things I was not going to name for her. She would have to name them herself, in her own time, in whatever way she was capable of. And then I told her that I was going to refer her case to the full trial committee for standard review. That her application would be assessed by the same criteria as every other applicant. That I would not use my position to expedite or to block. That the process would be what it was designed to be: fair, evidence-based, and independent of my personal history with the patient. She looked at me for a long moment. "Is that a yes or a no?" she asked. "It's the truth," I said. Which is more than I was given. I was not going to save her to prove I was better than her. And I was not going to deny her to prove she had hurt me. I was going to do the thing that the 16-year-old in that doorframe deserved to have done for her: treat the life in front of me as the priority it always was. I stood up. I put on my lab coat, which was hanging on the back of my chair. I picked up the folder. "The committee will be in touch within 2 weeks," I said. "My assistant can answer any logistical questions on your way out." I walked to the door. I opened it. And then, because she was still sitting there, and because some things need to be said even when they are not strategic or useful or professionally appropriate. "I hope you get better, Mom," I said. "I mean that completely. Because I know what this condition takes from you. And no one deserves that." I walked out. I walked down the corridor, past the portrait, back toward the laboratory. The lab was warm with the hum of equipment. The reagents were where I had left them. The data set was still open on the screen. I put on fresh gloves. I went back to work. I want to tell you about my sister, because her story is part of this one, even though she is not the center of it. Vanessa did not choose to be the golden child. She was placed there, the way children are placed in roles by parents who need the roles filled. She performed the part she was given with genuine enthusiasm and, I believe, genuine love for the performance itself. She was not a bad person. She was a child who was told that being seen was the most important thing she could offer the world, and she believed it, because she was 13 and her mother was saying it, and children tend to believe the things their mothers say. The pageant career ended. The world moved on. Vanessa was left with a skill set that was specific to a context that no longer existed, a mother whose health was declining and whose emotional resources had always been organized around performance rather than substance, and a sister she had not spoken to in 15 years. She reached out to me eventually. Not through my mother, through Ruth, who had maintained quiet contact with both sides of the family the way older women sometimes do, holding the threads without pulling them. The message was brief. She said she knew what had happened the night I left. She said she had not known, at the time, about the medication, that she had been told only that I had gone to stay with Ruth for a while. She said she was sorry. Not with the complicated, self-protective sorry that comes with a list of reasons. Just, I am sorry. I was a child and I did not know, and I am sorry. I wrote back. We are not close. 15 years of distance does not dissolve in a single exchange of messages. But we are in contact. We are careful with each other, the way people are careful with something new and fragile that they are not sure yet how to hold. I think that is the honest version of reconciliation. Not a dramatic reunion. Not a scene. Just two people deciding slowly to try. The dress is gone, by the way. Long gone. The pageant trophies are in storage somewhere. The sequins that were worth more than my survival are in a landfill, or a donation box, or simply disintegrated, the way shiny things do when they are not maintained. What lasted was the scar tissue. And what grew from the scar tissue slowly, improbably, against the odds, was this. A laboratory. A treatment. A life. I have been thinking about what I want to say to you in this final section. And I keep coming back to a word my mother used that night. She said I was always sick anyway. Always sick anyway. As if the illness were a habit. As if my body's need for medical support were a character choice I had made for inconvenient reasons. I want to talk to you about that phrase, because I think a version of it has been said to a lot of people who are watching this. Maybe not about medication. Maybe about something else you need. Something you have asked for and been told you were selfish for needing. Something that was taken from you, your time, your resources, your peace, your safety, and replaced with something shinier that serves someone else's sense of priority. Maybe someone looked at your need and said, you'll figure it out. You might figure it out. It is possible. I am proof that it is possible. To survive being told your survival is not the priority. To build something real from the rubble of that. To arrive somewhere on the other side that is genuinely yours. But I want to say clearly, the fact that you can survive something does not make it acceptable that you had to. Resilience is not a justification for the wound that required it. The strength you build from being abandoned is real. The abandonment was still wrong. Both things are true. You are stronger for what you survived. And you deserved not to have to survive it. Hold both of those. Do not let anyone use the first to erase the second. I am a researcher because of what happened to me. The work is real, and the results are real, and the people who have benefited from the treatment protocol are real, and that matters enormously to me. It would have been better if I had gotten there without the 16-year-old shaking in the doorframe. If there had been someone in that kitchen who said, the medication is the priority. Always. Without negotiation. Without a dress on the counter changing the equation. It would have been better. And it would have been enough. The same destination, with less scar tissue. Do not romanticize the scar tissue. Do not tell yourself it had to be this way. Look at what you built from it, yes, but also look at what should have been different, and remember that. And when it is in your power to be the person who says, the medication is the priority, say it. Be that person. In whatever form it takes in your own life. Be the door that opens. Ruth died 2 years ago. She was 84 years old. She died in the house that smelled like coffee and old paperbacks, in her own bed, the way she had wanted. I was with her. I told her, near the end, that she had saved my life. Not metaphorically. Literally. The 1-hour drive and the spare bedroom and the trip to the pharmacy and the first refill she paid for and never once asked to be repaid for. She said, you saved it yourself. I just opened the door. I think about that a lot. I think that is the most precise description of what love is actually for. Before you go, I want to ask you something real. If someone who had tried to take your life, not with a weapon, but with indifference, with the casual decision that your survival was less important than their convenience, if that person came to you needing the very thing you had built from surviving them, what would you do? I am not going to tell you there is a right answer. I am going to tell you that the answer I found was the one I could live with. Not the one that felt most satisfying in the moment. Not the one that the 16-year-old in the doorframe would have chosen out of pain. The one that the person I had become, slowly, expensively, on my own terms, could stand behind. That is the only standard I have ever found that actually holds. Not, what would feel good right now? But, what can I stand behind when the moment is over? Tell me in the comments what you think you would do. Tell me if you have been in a version of this situation. Tell me if you're in one now. Tell me if you are the 16-year-old in the doorframe, still counting the cost, still figuring it out on your own. I read every comment. I mean that. If you are fighting a battle right now that no one around you even acknowledges is happening, subscribe. Share this. Because you are not invisible here. And your survival is not a workaround. It is the point. It has always been the point. I'm Chloe. I am the lead researcher. My medication was the priority. Thank you for watching.